So now we move on to our bubble case of the week, where we're addressing a, a guy who's on the Hall of Fame ballot, who I guess is being, the theme has been guys that are sort of getting ignored by the writers, but probably should be getting more consideration. It's
This is
another
one of the
case.
top cases of that.
This is one of the top cases with that. That's been the general theme so far. So first we talked about Bobby Abreu. Our second week was Mark Burley, who's on his first ballot. Then last week we talked about Todd Helton, and this week we're talking about Andruw Jones, one of the more dominant guys of the early 2000s. Believe it or not, believe it based on the actual statistics. But yeah, Andruw Jones, he has been ignored, generally speaking. He's been on 3 ballots thus far. He got 7.3% in 2018, 7.5% in 2019, and 19.4% in 2020. And thus far in the current election, out of 43 ballots that have been casted, out of 400,
396.
out of 400 that are going to be cast ultimately, Andruw Jones currently has 30.2%. So based off of the small sample, getting a bit of a rise, something to be optimistic about in the future, because he's not getting in this year, most probably, but by his 8th, 9th, 10th time, there's potential there. So, what's the general look with Andruw Jones? Like when we see Andruw Jones, what are we seeing with the Hall of Fame case?
Well, we're seeing, the first thing that people tend to look at is wins above replacement, and that is favorable to him. 62.7 B WAR, 67 F WAR. One of the few guys of this era to have a higher F WAR than B WAR, so that's interesting. On Baseball Reference, he had a 46.4 peak WAR, which is when they take the best 7 seasons they had and add them all up, which is actually above average among Hall of Fame center fielders. So his peak would fit right in with everyone else's. This is a little concerning. His career slash line is 254, 337, 486, 823. That is his slash line. 111 OPS plus and 111 weighted runs created plus. 1,933 career hits, 434 career home runs. So obviously power numbers are pretty good. And also his defense. That's one of his strongest traits on a baseball field. 24.4 defensive WAR, which is 22nd of all time, and 278.8 defensive runs above average, which is 11th all time. He won 10 Gold Gloves in center field, and he hit 273 with a 796 OPS in 279 plate appearances in the playoffs. So, Chris, you made some comparisons, people that were right around his range.
Yeah, and first I'll say, this is probably our most unique case so far, because we've done 2 position players, 1 pitcher. Pitchers are pretty easy to get a grasp of statistically, and the 2 position players we did were offensive dominant, so it's really a thing of did they excel at offense enough? Andruw Jones, it's debating the combination of offense and defense. Is he a Hall of Famer? Because offense alone, not a Hall of Famer. Defense alone, if he was very bad offensively, he would not be Hall of Fame caliber. An example of that would be Omar Vizquel, who not going to get into his news, but we've talked about Omar Vizquel being 18% below average hitter. Andruw Jones is 11% above average hitter, but if he was at that level of being that below average, that alone would not give him a solid his defense alone would not give him a solid Hall of Fame case. But because he was above average, I think we both think that there's definitely a solid case. So it's interesting with that, because with Todd Helton and Bobby Abreu, we were just looking at their offense because they were average to below average defensively, and it's a lot easier to measure when we're really only looking at one side of the game. But with this, it's very interesting because we have to look at kind of the combined efforts of Andruw Jones. So to the comparisons that actually the one comparison I made, it's only with wins above replacement. So he had 62.7 B WAR, and he did it in 8,664 plate appearances. So here's the list of retired players with 60 to 65 B WAR in 7,500 to 9,500 plate appearances. And I note the plate appearances because, getting 60 B WAR in 7,500 plate appearances is a lot different than getting 60 B WAR in like 11,000 plate appearances. The guy with 7,500 plate appearances was probably a little more dominant during his time, and was probably better while he played, even though he didn't have as much longevity. But anyway, those players with those specific filters, Reggie Smith, who is a first ballot drop, Chase Utley, who I believe likely will get into the Hall of Fame, Joe Cronin, who is a Hall of Famer, Billy Hamilton, no, not that Billy Hamilton, but dead ball era Hall of Famer Billy Hamilton, who's well known for his base stealing ability and his walks. Ken Boyer, who we actually talked about last week, he maxed out on ballots. Mark McGwire is also fits this criteria. He would be a guaranteed Hall of Famer if not for PEDs. Jack Glasscock, who is a dead ball era non-Hall of Famer. Todd Helton, who we talked about last week as our bubble case. He's on the ballot. He's getting some traction right now.
Yes, he's +7, I believe.
Yeah, he's doing pretty well this year. Sal Bondo, who is a first ballot drop, Jim Edmonds, who was a first ballot drop, and Keith Hernandez, who was a ninth ballot drop. So actually, I would say that
Those two
here,
last ones should be Hall of Famers.
yeah, there's definitely cases, but I guess in terms of trends, in terms of what the writers look at, I guess they don't really favor Andruw Jones, but we kind of disagree with that because there are guys in that list that we think probably should be Hall of Famers. Like I think that Ken Boyer and Keith Hernandez definitely, I believe, should be a Hall of Famer. And then
I would add, I mean, Chase Utley obviously isn't eligible yet. I think he's going to have my vote when he gets on. Jim Edmonds, I'd also argue, is a Hall of Famer.
yeah, Jim Edmonds and Sal Bondo is a guy who had good defense and a guy who is like a combined effort guy, not really dominating one side of the ball. And usually with comparisons, I will compare guys in a certain range of OPS plus, but like we mentioned, it's really more of a combined effort with Andruw Jones in terms of offense and defense. So I'm not really comparing offensive numbers this episode because he was so prominent defensively, and it really wouldn't be fair to compare him offensively to anybody because it definitely wouldn't benefit him, and it would be quite odd to just do that. But is there anything that you draw from these comparisons before I get into the case against Andruw Jones?
I think we kind of just covered it. Like, there's a lot of guys on this list that get the short end of the stick, and it seems like Andruw Jones has gotten that so far in his time on the ballot.
Yeah, but luckily we do have the modern statistics now that guys like Keith Hernandez and Ken Boyer like didn't benefit from.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, luckily we have that, and newer age writers, more advanced knowledge of things like this helps Jones out, especially he's going to be with this year he'll be on 7 more ballots as long as he doesn't get below 5%, which he probably will not be getting below 5%
I doubt it
at any point. But anyway, the case against Andruw Jones being in the Hall of Fame, it's a lot of the more basic evaluation points. His ability to get on base at a 337 clip was kind of par for the course, especially for his era. Played in a more offensive era, so a 337 on base percentage. And if you're an average person or a batting average person,
Then get out.
he only hit 254. So if in terms of getting on base from hits, he was not very effective. He was he was more power heavy. But on base wise, was not, he was par for the course. Also, Andruw Jones, he had a very steep decline. So he had a very dominant era for sure, but he fell off pretty much immediately after that. So that would go in the case against him. Didn't really have very much longevity. I think that's why, if Andruw Jones had 2 or 3 more quality years, he got to, he could have maybe, if he didn't have such a steep decline, maybe got to 500 home runs. Maybe he's in already, but he did not have the longevity. And also in the case against Andruw Jones, he did not reach 2,000 hits or 1,000 walks. That kind of ties in with the on base stuff, but and also it ties into his longevity. Didn't really hit those milestones. Also, with Andruw Jones, he struck out 100 plus times in 11 seasons, and he did not exceed a 136 OPS plus in a season. So he wasn't exactly dominant with the bat for his era. And he never finished in the top 10 in any slash line category. So, even though he is, the case for him, he's above average offensively. He never really had a dominant run offensively, as he was never top 10 in, average on base percentage, slugging, or OPS. Never cracked the top 10 there. And in terms of the MVP vote, he only finished in the top 5 once in 2005. And the last thing I will say in the case against Andruw Jones, the case you could make against Andruw Jones being in the Hall of Fame, is even with defensive metrics, defensive ability and his impact on the game can be very subjective, and I'm kind of, I kind of understand the argument of defensive metrics not real, not being that reliable. So if you were someone that watched Andruw Jones and you were not that impressed, so to say, or don't really think he's doesn't exceed a Hall of Fame standard, there is that argument, because I would say with offensive statistics, I don't really need an eye test for offensive stuff, but with defensive stuff, I definitely understand having to kind of take a look at somebody to understand that. But in the case for him, he did do some spectacular things defensively, and he definitely had a very positive impact on the game defensively. But in the case against him, if you doubt defensive metrics, wins above replacement can be deceiving like that. So, if you're not very into defensive metrics, you might doubt Andruw Jones's Hall of Fame legitimacy. But if you are into that stuff, there's a very, very solid case for Andruw Jones being in the Hall of Fame.
Right. So we mentioned before his peak WAR of around 46.4, I believe it was, above average among Hall of Fame center fielders. So not just above average, period, above average among those who are already in Cooperstown. Andruw Jones' peak would fit right in. And he was top 5 in Baseball Reference wins above replacement 4 times during his career, which is a pretty substantial amount. He led the league in defensive WAR 4 times. He finished top 5 6 times, and he finished in the top 10 9 times throughout his career. And a lot of people on the ballot don't get consideration because of their alleged PED use. As of now, knock on wood, there have been no PED allegations against Andruw Jones. So that's definitely something promising. If a writer chooses not to vote for Barry Bonds, Andruw Jones would be a really good alternative, because he was very versatile on the field. He did everything extraordinarily well. He is the only,
and we're going to mention, like, in his dominant era, he was behind, two guys that were controversial because of their
Yeah,
PED use. So
that's
like
right.
if you take them out, he would have been the best player of that era. So
Right.
definitely benefits him for sure.
He is the only player in Major League Baseball history to have 100 wins above replacement runs batting and 220 wins above replacement runs fielding. I'm going to explain what those stats mean. It's essentially just, I know WAR, is can be confusing, but it's essentially just like the amount of wins above replacement runs you produced while batting and runs you saved while fielding. Andruw Jones is the only player with 100 batting runs and 220 fielding runs. And if you were to lower that filter to 100 and 200, 100 offensive, 200 defensive, the only players who apply to that are Andruw Jones, Adrian Beltre, and Roberto Clemente. I don't think anyone's challenging the Hall of Fame candidacies of Adrian Beltre and Roberto Clemente. You mentioned earlier his 2005 season. That is the only season in Major League history with 50 home runs and a defensive WAR above 2.0, which is very impressive.
Yeah.
Andruw Jones is one of just 26 players to have exactly 5 seasons of 6B WAR, 6+. 17 of those players are in the Hall of Fame, so that means I believe 8 or 9 would be left out.
Yeah.
But the players who are not in on that list are Shoeless Joe Jackson, who was involved in the Black Sox scandal, Ken Boyer, who we mentioned earlier, was maxed out on ballots, Todd Helton, our previous bubble case, who was on the ballot, Andruw Jones, of course, our case, and then Adrian Beltre, Chase Utley, Joey Votto, Josh Donaldson, and Mookie Betts, all of which are not eligible. So he's among some pretty great players there of exactly 5 seasons of 6+ B WAR. And he has the 7th highest FWAR among outfielders since the year 1970. That is 50 years ago. So over the last 50 years of baseball, the top 7 outfielders in wins above replacement, according to Fangraphs, are Barry Bonds, Ricky Henderson, Ken Griffey Jr., Mike Trout, Larry Walker, and Carlos Beltran. And then right behind them is Andruw Jones. Fits right in. So now we want to take a look at his peak. He had the 3rd highest FWAR in the majors, not filtering anything, from 1997 to 2006. The only people ahead of him were Barry Bonds and Alex Rodriguez, both of them alleged PED users. One of them confirmed, one of them alleged, but let's be real, he definitely did it. He is also one of 3 players in MLB history with 400 home runs, an offensive WAR above 35, and a defensive WAR above 20. The other 2 are Adrian Beltre, like we mentioned before, and Cal Ripken Jr. Jones is one of 3 players of all time with 4 seasons with 20 stolen bases and a 2.5 defensive WAR. Ozzie Smith and Joe Tinker are the other 2. They are both Hall of Famers. There have been 10 seasons in baseball history where a player has produced 26 home runs, 20 stolen bases, and a DWAR above 2.5. Andruw Jones owns 3 of them. Nobody else has more than 1. And then lastly, Andruw Jones has 6 seasons with an 800 plus OPS and a 1.5 DWAR, and that is tied for the most in baseball history with Chase Utley, Alex Rodriguez, and Hall of Famer Joe Gordon. So he's right up there with all the greats as far as guys who could hit, play defense, and run.
Yeah, for sure. He is definitely an embodiment of an all-around player, especially during his prime. He slowed down at the base running later in his career, as everyone does.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's the tough thing with Jones, though, is he didn't. I guess he did dominate in one aspect of the game, but it's defense, and people don't really look at that. He's not part of an exclusive like 500 home run club, or having like 2,500 hits. It's the defensive runs above average club. It's the combined batting runs and defensive runs, all these crazy stats. But even with that, he did win 10 Gold Gloves. He had the respect of his peers. He obviously was a great fielder. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. And according to Baseball Reference and Fangraphs, he was 11% better than the average hitter. So with all that, with the combined package, that's a legit great baseball player for sure. And
Absolutely.
we're I guess we're selling ourselves out here, but
Do we want to? I was to say,
we're
do we
putting
want
him
to
on the
say
ballot.
where we stand on him?
Yeah,
I'm adding him this year, and I decided on that back in March.
yeah. I think I will definitely be adding him.
Yeah, I
Like
did
I'm
not. I did not vote for him last year, nor have I ever voted for him before. But that's going to change this year.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of like my my Hall of Fame power rankings in terms of where I feel like they are. I think Andruw
I
Jones is
think
like,
there's a chance we might just have the exact same ballot.
yeah, I think Jones is top five for me in terms of voting. I put him ahead of ahead of like Todd Helton, who I probably will be putting on the ballot. I put him ahead of Bobby Abreu, who we've already done, and a couple other guys that I probably will be
Yeah,
having on
like
the ballot. So I think I'm definitely going to be putting him on my mock ballot, as you will as well.
yes. Now, obviously, our votes don't matter. Hopefully, one day they will. But
Yeah, that would be so cool.
that's honestly like I've kind of realized that might be my dream job, just to have a vote in the hall. Maybe I'll just ask Jeff Passan for his.